you know, it's funny, when I watched the film, I had one of my cats in my lap the entire time, because he just watches TV with us, and I was hugging and kissing him quite a bit during this, as you can imagine.
You
It was,
know, if it can bring us closer to our animals, then we've succeeded.
yeah, it was. I think I mentioned to somebody. He kept looking up at me like, "Why is it raining on me? What is going on?" Yeah, it was quite a bit. I'm really glad to and happy to be talking with you guys today. And congratulations on the National Board of Review top 5 mention. I love that for you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm
Uh,
just sorry. I'm just trying to figure out. Should I change my name here,
I think you're
or
all
will
right.
that not be showing?
It will be, but I think it's fine. And we're good.
Okay, I don't know how to do that. But uh, okay, I'll just be Confilm. That's my name.
I
I
think
am too.
Oh yeah,
yes,
we're
I
both
think it's
Confilm.
great. I
Okay.
love it. um, so this is your first feature, but your background sort of makes sense for it. Was this a natural progression to make a feature film?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It was a long process for me. I would say Melissa always knew that it was something that she was going to do. I was somebody that actually about 8 years ago when we started dating, I hated documentaries for the most part. I found them super boring, and I just couldn't ever really get into many of them. There were, of course, a few documentaries that I watched that I was very taken by. Like I remember seeing The Cove, which I think was 2010 or 2011, and being really impressed. And so I probably should have been paying more attention to them than I was. But Melissa, as long as I've known her for a few years longer than we've been dating. She's always been very focused, laser focused on documentary film. And so she, has had sort of a subtle campaign for many years trying to convince me that we should turn our focus to making films, and slowly started bringing me around by showing me films that were made very differently from the documentaries I was used to growing up. And and then I guess, at some point, it was one of those weird subtle things where I shifted enough to where I was actually starting to look for a film project. And then quite accidentally, serendipitously, even I just happened to bump into Harry and Samantha when I was down in the Peruvian Amazon on another project. So for me, it was definitely much longer progression than it was for Melissa.
Yeah, there's still something that will never prepare you for your first featured length documentary though. And I've been making short films for about a decade and teaching myself to edit and to shoot. I didn't really know what directing and producing was, but I knew what filming and editing, those are the two ingredients of making a movie for me until this really. And when you've been making short films, our last film that Trevor and I worked on together was 17 minutes, and it's a very different level of commitment. The finances of it, the build out of a team, I mean, the emotional labor, the creative structure, there's so many things that are just dramatically different that we had to really go on a pretty steep learning curve.
Yeah. What was inspiring about Harry Turner and his story that compelled you to tell it?
And originally, for me, I spent pretty much the last 15 years traveling to remote, wild places, trying to photograph wildlife, and sometimes cultural stories, but mostly wildlife. And every time I went to one of these places, I would inevitably run into a few people, and I always found that I really got along with them. They were sort of kindred spirits. And it always occurred to me when I got to know these people better that they almost all came from unusual backgrounds. Many of them had difficult childhoods, or they struggled with mental health issues. And so I guess I started asking the question, why is it that all these people are ending up in these remote environments? What is it about these places that draws people that have had difficult lives, to these corners of the earth? And so then when I met Harry and Samantha, I guess it was the most clear story that I had seen in terms of why two people ended up where they ended up and doing the work that they were doing. You know, what is it about someone that makes them want to throw themselves into, you know, raising and rescuing and raising wildlife and trying to put it back into the wild? You know, it's incredibly difficult work, often traumatic in and of itself. And so I was just very pulled in by this idea that the two of them had found each other on this remote river in the Peruvian Amazon, and that you know, what were the reasons that pulled them in there. And I think one of the main reasons was that they found a certain solace, a certain level of healing and stability there that they couldn't find in society. And so that was what originally really pulled us into this story. And of course, many other things happened and unfolded that made the story much more complex in the end. But that was what originally really drew us to the you know, story of Harry and Samantha.
Yeah, we were really interested in this idea of the healing power of nature. And that's something that, you know, Trevor and I talk about a lot, and for our own reasons are drawn to wild places. And so, you know, through Harry's story, it was very clear that the Amazon, that, you know, this wild place had a huge role in his being alive. You know, the fact that he was still alive, and he talks about this, where, you know, he, after 14 days of being there, and he had originally actually gone there to disappear and to make his death look like an accident. And after 14 days of arriving, and, you know, not long after that, you know, meeting Samantha, it was pretty clear that he wanted to keep living, and that this was a beautiful place, and that there was light in the world. So that was a very striking original kind of idea of, you know, how can we explore this more? And then, of course, as production went on and we learned about Samantha's backstory with her own trauma, the ability to compare and contrast and to hold, you know, different truths about kind of coping with what we've been through and how that shapes us and makes us who we are became apparent.
Yeah, it's documentaries are a funny thing because they can often change their course mid-production, because real life then starts dictating what the story is. What changed for you the most entering this project versus how it ended up?
I mean, I think there were two major things. One was that, you know, halfway through production, Samantha started opening up to us. Unfortunately, her father, who she had a very complicated relationship with, passed away. And that was sort of end of February, early March of 2019. And after he passed away is when she really started sharing with us more about what had gone on as she was growing up with her family. And so that was a major turning point for us, because up to that point we were fairly laser focused on Harry's story. And then when we started to learn more about Samantha, all these other things started to make sense. You know, I always tell the story that one of the first times that I ever met Samantha, she and I were walking on this street in this small town called Puerto Maldonado, which is where you fly into to get to this area of rainforest that we were working. And every single dog that we passed on the street, Samantha stopped and fed. And she carried this backpack of collars, and she would put collars in every dog that didn't have a collar. And I asked her why she was doing that. And she said, well, if they have collars on them, then it means it's less likely that people will hurt them, because they assume it's someone's pet. And she was also at the same time, you know, getting down on her you know, on her butt, and, you know, cuddling these dogs that have mange. And, you know, I, as someone who loves animals, I kind of was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's willing to kind of even do that. Like they're so in such bad shape. I kind of almost, my impulse was to, you know, to euthanize them because they seemed in such bad shape. But Sam just couldn't stop but helping every single animal that she found. And that certainly raised kind of questions in me, like where does this come from? And so then obviously later on, when Sam starts to reveal more about herself, all of those things started to make perfect sense. And then the other was that, you know, we knew that Harry still struggled, but I think we weren't prepared for how much he was going to struggle as things started to fall apart in the end. You know, the process of reintroducing Keanu was going really well overall, but when Keanu starts coming back to the platform, you know, Harry viewed that as a abject failure, and everyone else kind of saw it as a fairly normal thing, but Harry really thought that he was failing. And at the same time, you know, his relationship with Samantha was disintegrating, And at the same time, he was also starting to grapple with the fact that he was going to have to leave and go back into society, which is a place where he doesn't really feel he fits in anymore. So all three of those things were happening at once. And what that resulted in was him going into some pretty dark places, some pretty difficult moments. And I think that, you know, we weren't prepared for it to go that way. And I, you know, the other thing about that, of course, is that when something like that does happen, society doesn't really do a great job of preparing us as young people to deal with all of the things that we will inevitably deal with as adults, right? We're taught math and science and reading comprehension and how to write, but no one discusses with us grief and, you know, conflict resolution and how to handle a friend who might be struggling with suicide. And I think that those are all things that really should be incorporated into, you know, into lessons when you're growing up, middle school or high school, whenever is appropriate. And so those were the two big twists that I can think of.
Yeah. It's like you just mentioned with Samantha hugging dogs with mange and putting a collar on them. You have a few choices. You can ignore it or you can embrace. And it's the same thing with people and their PTSD and ability to not just deal with it, but how people deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely struck a chord with me because I think all of us are used to walking down the street and ignoring, say, the homeless person who has been sitting there every day that we walk by, and it becomes this really easy thing to do. And I think society has kind of created this world where everyone is very afraid to help other people. I've certainly seen that personally firsthand. I was a paramedic for some time, many years ago,
Mm.
and, you know, I can't tell you how many times we would show up to car accidents and find people standing around not helping because there's such kind of a fear of doing the wrong thing or fear of getting sued, or just like a sort of a inability to take action. And one of the things that you know, one of the other things, frankly, that drew Melissa and I into this story initially was this idea that Harry and Sam were two people who took action. You know, they saw something that was wrong in the world, that these young cats needed help, and they might not have had all the best credentials and the best experience and the best resources, but they still gave everything that they had to the project, and they learned in the process. And, you know, what's so exciting about that is they both now move forward with all of that experience into all of the future work that they'll do.
Yeah. Melissa, a little bit on that track. Harry's PTSD and certainly Samantha's as well is a big theme of the film. How did you manage their safety and the safety of others as everything was happening?
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning when we started this film, we knew that it was going to be a very deep collaboration. And from the beginning, you know, when it came to filming Keanu specifically, we didn't have access to him as a part of their reintroduction protocol. They wouldn't they didn't allow us to get close to him, which we respected and admired because of the seriousness of the work that they were doing. But, you know, that immediately posed some challenges in terms of following this reintroduction and this arc. And so from the beginning, we always wanted to have it as a collaboration, you know, they would be equal partners in filming and, of course, doing the work. And that meant filming themselves as well. And, you know, in Harry in particular, you see him filming himself in deep ways, you know, over a long period of time and through some tough moments. And Samantha as well, you know, filming him or filming herself. You don't see this on screen, but they were also filming us. and and so we were kind of throughout production, we were always having conversations about, you know, the things that we were okay filming or not, or willing to talk about, and where the film was going, and, you know, all of our roles in that. And so, you know, during those harder moments, especially, you know, kind of earlier on in production, actually later on in production when Trevor was there and when Harry was having kind of the larger suicidal crisis that you see in the film, I was back in Virginia having brain surgery. So I had a cyst that they found in my brain and I had to get that removed. So I had to step away from the project for a month or so to recover. And that left Trevor basically alone, trying to navigate and handle some of those more tricky moments towards the end. But I think, yeah, looking at earlier in production and during some of those more difficult times, it was coming from a place of trust and friendship and really like a family. We all lived on this platform together out in the middle of the rainforest, and we did everything together. We cooked and cleaned and went to bed and woke up. So there was a certain just level of understanding and familiarity. And so when we had those conversations about some of their past and some of the more traumatic experiences, it was something that we all felt like we needed or wanted to talk about. And as much as you don't see, Trevor and myself on screen, we were very much a part of that process and kind of, the vulnerability that it takes to have those conversations. And we say this, I think it's important that, you can't ask someone to be vulnerable if you're not willing to be vulnerable yourself. And it's a very critical part of developing that relationship and kind of going deep with each other, is also pulling off your own layers and taking off the mask and being able to talk about or confront things that, maybe that I hadn't talked about in my whole life. So it was something that we constantly were trying to navigate and do what felt right ethically, and emotionally. And sometimes that meant putting the camera down. There was a lot of times where cameras were set up or on tripods and we were recording things, sometimes by accident, or that we happened to catch, or we intended to film something else and something different happened. So, many of those decisions actually took place in the edit in terms of what we felt we should include or should not include. But the actual production, the filmmaking process, was very collaborative and something that we are constantly, talking to each other about and trying to figure out.
Yeah, I love the cinematography credits in the movie, which cover everybody, and it shows the scope of the need so that you were able to have some physical distance. Because I think as documentarians, there's a lot of different styles you can choose as a storyteller. You can really be a part of the story or be very, very removed. Or sounds like you wanted to find a place that was a little bit in the middle there.
In the
Yeah.
edit, it became clear that we had already so many themes and story arcs and characters. We played around with including ourselves in the actual movie when we got into the edit, because there was a lot of footage of us and they were filming us. And, some of those more difficult moments towards the end, like we talked about, Trevor talked with Harry and filmed himself. And, there was kind of those moments where you have to turn the camera on yourself because we're also trying to navigate this in real time. But there was already so much in the story and characters to follow, so it didn't feel right.
Yeah.
But we were very much part of that story as well.
It's fascinating. Despite being a documentary, it has all the makings of a narrative feature. There's a love story. It's a wonderful essay on nature, compelling central characters, very cute animals, but not, a Disney movie version, and it's extremely cinematic. I wonder if that might ever pique your interest to do a narrative feature version of something like this.
I've been saying for a long time that I want Melissa to make a narrative scripted film, and that I would help produce it, but I'll let her direct it. It's too many people that are involved in those. You have you have your DPs, and you have your cameraman, and you have your first AC and your second AC, like 60 people or more on set. So I'll let Melissa probably delve into that world, and then I'll figure out how to piece it all together. But yeah, there's certainly been interest from others into turning this into narrative scripted film. which is exciting and also a little bit terrifying because, you know, so often you hear stories of people's documentaries or writers that write books and they sell the rights to their book and the movie turns out very different, usually not so good. So that's kind of right now we're trying to figure out if we're ready to make our next documentary.
Exactly. And the size of the deal when Amazon picked up the film had to be a bit overwhelming, I imagine. How did it feel?
Overwhelming, surreal. Yeah, I mean, you know, when you, I think in any time you're making a film, but especially the first time, you are not thinking about this. This is the last thing you're thinking about. You know, we're thinking, can we pay off our credit cards? Because when we started this movie, we threw all of ourselves into it and we took a huge leap. And I look back and I think, wow, that was actually really reckless in terms of, you know, the debt that we took on and flew ourselves down on frequent flyer miles that Trevor had accumulated over his work of, you know, doing photography around the world. And yeah, so, you know, to have, I think more than anything along the process, to continue to see people that believe in you as storytellers and believe in the power of this film is really, really gratifying. That happened, you know, when we brought on our two producers, Alyssa Namias and Joshua Altman, to have them come on board to see what we saw and to, you know, to join the team and to have people like that believe in you that have been doing this for so long is extremely gratifying, and they brought so much to the table. And then that happened again when we brought on our sales and equity partners, 30 West, a year before we sold it to Amazon. And, you know, we got turned down by probably 7 or more different places and no one, you know, wanted to back the film, and to have a partner like 30 West and, you know, for them to just get it so clearly and to see the vision and to want to be a part of it was again overwhelming and really powerful. And then we experienced that again, you know, with the sale, and it felt like to have a place like Amazon want this film and for us to know that it was going to have a home and for it to be able to reach millions of people was it gave us a whole lot of energy too, because at that point we had our first rough cut, and we knew we had a long road ahead of us, and to have an inevitable home and a deadline and timelines, and, you know, it gave the edit team, particularly, you know, since I was in the edit with the team, it just gave us a whole lot of energy to be able to get to the finish line, which is the hardest part in many ways. Yeah.
I think the most important thing, though, I mean, it was definitely, as Melissa said, overwhelming and surreal, but I think it was also, there was obviously a very clear celebration. And the reason for that is that, you know, we shared the back end equally with Harry and Samantha. Samantha has been working in conservation for 7 years and has never paid herself for doing that. She's just covered her expenses. So she's now, you know, able to continue her work and she doesn't have to be as concerned about her personal finances, which is really, you know, a great feeling that she now has sort of made up for all that time that she's contributed to conservation. And the same is true of Harry. You know, the most money he had ever made was working in the military. He got paid $13,000 to serve in the British Armed Forces in Afghanistan. So the fact that he, you know, is now shared in that and is able to continue with his conservation work, but not necessarily have to worry about his personal finances as much as he once did. I guess that's a great feeling. And then, of course, we also shared it with our producers and our co-producers. And so, like, our two producers, you know, who have been working in documentary film for close to 20 years each, they had never made money on a film. And so now they've both made enough money that, you know, they can, like, probably send their kids to college and stuff like that, or who knows what. But it's just, that was obviously a very amazing experience to know that all these people's lives were going to be changed in some way because of it.
Yeah. And I know we're in the press and awards season run of this, but to what we were talking about a bit ago, have you thought about what you would want to do next?
Yeah, we're actually starting production on our next film. We've got a couple things cooking, but
Good.
it's not easy to try and juggle. I don't know how people do it, or they have like 4 things going at one time, because just trying to wrap up Wildcat and start the next one is maybe more than we can handle. And I think part of that is because our work is so, we do really bring a lot of ourselves to the story, and we do tend to find that personal connection with the characters, or the collaborators that we're working with. So I think it kind of demands a certain amount of ourselves that we can't, be maybe doing as many things at the same time. But yeah, this story takes place in South India, and similar kind of human animal themes. So
I'm into that. I will watch that with my cat as well.
if your cat likes snakes, then yes.
Actually, yes.
Okay,
Very
good.
much. An indoor outdoor cat and brings us snakes like almost every day.
Oh no.
Very, the little ones, stuff like that. But yeah,
We won't get into the conservation impacts of outdoor cats, but
I know.
they're dramatic.
Very much so. Trevor, Melissa, thank you so much for giving some time today and letting us talk about this incredible film.
Thank you so much, Eric.
I can't wait for people to see it. And I can't wait to see what you guys do next.
Thanks.
4 years from now.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I realized
guys.
there's like a magic light too coming from my shoulder. So
yes, it's a sign.
thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.